if I can take the opportunity to welcome Mukti Mitchell up to the floor to actually give us a short presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's an honour to be here this evening with all of you environmental businesses in Devon. It's an honour to be here at the Met Office, which is the home of the Hadley Centre, one of the 3 most important climate change monitoring stations in the world. And it's a real honour to be here on the 25th anniversary of Debi, the Devon Environmental Business Initiative. 25 years ago, in 1992, Debi started, and that was also the year that was the first international summit on climate change in Rio de Janeiro. And that year, I started university. I went to study communication studies because I wanted to help my father, who was running Britain's oldest environmental magazine, to get the ideas about climate change out to a wider audience. Looking back 25 years, at that time, hardly anybody was interested in the environment, and most people thought it was a very wacky idea that human beings might be affecting the climate and that could have risks for our habitat into the future. So I wanted to spread those ideas, and I studied communications. And after I left university, I looked at this global situation and I realized that the green movement, which I knew so well, as my father had been running this magazine since it was established in 1966, I could see that putting pressure on governments and pointing the finger at people didn't seem to be working in creating changes. So I thought, what can I really do? And I've been exposed to all these environmental ideas. I think I understand the solutions to climate change. What can I do to really help and do something different? And so I thought, looking at the world as a sort of democratic place where individuals have the power to vote and they have the power to spend and we make all our own lifestyle decisions, if I could develop what I called at the time a low-carbon lifestyle, a sort of perfect lifestyle in which I could live in the sustainable limit, which is 2 tons per person per year of carbon dioxide. If I could live within that on an average wage in the UK and show that I was happy and healthy and enjoying my life, then that would be a kind of model lifestyle that then other people across the world could emulate as an example. And if everybody in the world cuts their own carbon footprint to 2 tons per person per year, that will result in the whole world living at a sustainable level. So I set out to do this, and I needed a tool to help me because I needed to be able to calculate my own carbon footprint. So I wrote a spreadsheet based on data from the government, and it was very simple. It allowed me to put in my petrol emissions and amount of electricity I was spending a year, etc., etc. And it told me my CO2 personal carbon footprint, CO2 output. Resurgence magazine, I sort of showed it to one of the editors at Resurgence magazine, and they said, oh, could you write an article about this? And I wrote an article, and they said, having read it, actually, it would be better as a live web page. And so I worked with a programmer, and we put it live on the internet. And to my great surprise, a few months later, it came first in an online survey of carbon calculators on the World Wide Web. And so what they said was it was the best balance between user-friendliness and understandability and accuracy. So I realized that I had a tool now that I could use for my own carbon footprint, and it was also respected across the planet. So I was started to get excited about possibilities. And so I started to work on my own carbon footprint, and I was doing things like seeing how many days in the week I could go without getting into my car, and going out to buy muddy vegetables from a local market garden, and spending extra time washing and cooking, etc., with local vegetables. And I thought, well, what am I going to do about products? If I can buy very high quality, long-lasting products, then if they last much longer, their carbon footprint is much lower over their lifetime. So I started these experiments, and I did it with what I think was very common at the time, a sense of guilt, a sense of responsibility, and the sense I must make sacrifices for the planet, because we're leading too extravagant lifestyles, and it's going to be no good for the children. But it wasn't so joyful. But 2 or 3 years down the line, something started to click in my mind, and I started to realize that every single decision that I was making, every single lifestyle choice I was making to cut my own carbon footprint was in fact improving my quality of life. I used to drive, I was working as a carpenter at the time, I used to drive my tools to the site and then ask the customer if I could leave them there for a couple of weeks while I was doing the job, and then cycle to work every day. And I found that when I cycled to work, I got there with my brain completely oxygenated and with lots of endorphins in my system, and I was in a great mood. And the customer was always very slightly surprised, but really pleased to see me, and it seemed to be incredible as well for efficiency, because I'd already worked out, my brain was working really well, I'd worked out how to get on with the job, I got right into the work. So just some cycling was greatly improving my quality of life. I found that the vegetables, which took so much longer to get from the Clovelly Court Gardens in the village of Clovelly in North Devon, and take home and wash and cook, etc. To my surprise, I noticed that I could eat carrots and parsnips and leeks week after week after week through the winter because they were so utterly delicious. And I think it's because they were often a few hours out of the ground. I bought an electric drill, which cost about £150. This is more than 25 years ago. I could have got one for a fifth of the price, but the gentleman at Bideford Tool, my favourite tool shop in Bideford at the time, persuaded me that this was going to stand the test of time. And you might be surprised to know that I still have that electric drill today, 27 years later, and I've got a feeling it will last for the rest of my life. So not only has it paid for itself many times over, its carbon footprint is a fraction of a cheap electric drill, but also every time I opened my toolbox as a carpenter on a regular basis, it was like seeing an old friend. It gave me a little moment of joy. So I started to realize that living a low-carbon lifestyle improved my quality of life and made me happier and healthier and, in the long run, wealthier. This completely turned things on its head, the whole thing, and I became more excited about the future potential of low-carbon living in the environment. I was interested in travel, and I crewed on yachts across the Atlantic and back, which I never would have thought of, although I learnt to sail in Insto. But if I hadn't have been trying to cut my carbon footprint, I never would have thought of this. But I was asking friends, how am I going to get to America? Someone said, well, you can crew on yachts and go and get a copy of Practical Boat Owner magazine and look in the classifieds. So I ended up crewing to the Americas and back, which was the experience of a lifetime, just thanks to this search for a low-carbon footprint. And I went on, when I got back, to design and build a little boat for myself to sail. And of course, it had to be low carbon. It had to have no engine. And I'd seen yachts stuck in port with frittering their money away all over the Atlantic due to engine problems, with parts stuck in customs and all sorts of problems. I never saw a yacht stuck in port with sail problems. So I thought, if I can do without an engine, it's also going to be a great advantage financially. But to do that, it had to be small enough and light enough to row, and yet it had to be seaworthy enough to go around the British coastline. So I've got a slide here of the boat. This was the boat that I designed and built. And again, this is the result of not any kind of genius. All my friends who've gone to school with me and university, etc., know that I'm definitely not the smartest person. But what happens when you start trying to look for a different solution is that you start coming across things that most people haven't discovered just because you're looking in a different place. And so I set out to design this zero-emission micro-yacht. And I invented this keel design, which was a very deep drop keel with a big lead weight on the bottom. And to my amazement, when I showed it to some yacht designers, they said this has never been done before. And it was nominated for Innovative Boat of the Year at the British Marine Awards in 2005. So again, just looking in a different place for solutions is incredible what you find. And this is why I'm so excited about the low-carbon future. There are so many exciting discoveries out there. And I know that you in this room are all running environmental businesses and looking at things in a different way. And I'm sure you're finding that you come across lots of advantages and benefits that you wouldn't have expected. So I ended up sailing around Britain to try and prove the design of the yacht and also to promote low-carbon lifestyles. And our MP, Geoffrey Cox, welcomed me when I reached London, and he asked his assistant to show me around the Houses of Parliament. And after the trip around Britain, he said, why don't you come to Parliament and do an internship for a couple of weeks? So I went to Parliament, and I did a couple of weeks, and he sent me to all the Climate Change Committee meetings. And I kept hearing MPs asking, how are we going to insulate Britain's old housing stock? Because that's a real headache. There are solutions for a lot of the lifestyle areas that we need to address. But old properties are a real headache. Now, to put that into context, I'll just explain the 5 major lifestyle areas in a low-carbon, in a carbon footprint, if you like. So in the UK, we have an average carbon footprint of 15 tonnes per person per year. I'm going to put it back to my, my general slide. 15 tonnes per person per year, and that's made up of 5 lifestyle areas. And this is heating your home, transport, food, holidays, and shopping. So the major solutions, to give you an overview, if we insulate our homes, we can cut our carbon footprint from that aspect by up to 80%. If we share transport, whether that's just sharing a lift to work in your car or public transport, if we buy local organic food, that cuts your carbon footprint from farming massively, up to 80%, in fact more. Holidays, if we can holiday more by ground level transport, that can massively reduce our footprint for holidays. And finally, shopping. If we purchase quality, long-lasting products, we can reduce the carbon footprint from products by 80%. My electric drill, I think, has achieved more than 80% against its low-quality counterpart. So that gives you the overview of the objective. And we're trying to reduce our personal carbon footprint from 15 tonnes down to 2 tonnes per person. So MPs were saying that actually one of the most difficult areas is heating our homes and the problem of Britain's old housing stock. Now, I had been a carpenter, and while I was building the boat, I'd been restoring old windows, so I knew old properties. I'd insulated my mother and father's farmhouse, and I also, as I mentioned, had this background in carbon footprinting, which is very close to energy auditing, so I thought, I think I could help with this problem of insulating Britain's old housing stock. And I spoke to a friend, an environmental entrepreneur called Paul Dickinson, and he said, I would like to help you with that tomorrow. So in 2010, we started Mitchell & Dickinson. It was then under the name of Cozy Home Company, and we set out to insulate Britain's old housing stock. Now, one company could never achieve this. It's such a massive task, as I will hope to illustrate a little bit later. But what we thought is if we could prove that the most elegant, heritage, hard-to-treat properties could be insulated, then other companies could fill in the middle ground and we could get Britain insulated in the next 20 years. So I want to share with you a little bit of my own work as just one example, as a reflection of the so many examples that there are in this room about what happens when you start looking for solutions, and the kind of solutions that are out there, even for things that are quite hard to imagine that you could solve. So Mitchell and Dickinson, making period homes warmer. There's the boat that was the vehicle to lead me to Mitchell and Dickinson. And firstly, some properties, the sorts of properties to insulate: an old Jacobean manor, a Redland villa in Bristol, a cottage near Totnes in Devon, and a Victorian terrace in Bideford, North Devon, all with windows often over 150 years old. So here's a beautiful sash window. In this case, it's a curved bay sash window in mid-Devon. So the process could start with a terrible, rotten-looking sill, and we use oak and pitch pine to replace sills. So there's a pitch pine sill ready to go in, and there it is slotted into place. You can see the mullion, vertical mullion, still needs to be replaced. And finally, the window's put back together. You've got the original sliding sash, but a new sill. And we've retained 90% of the timber and 90% of the glass. We then go on to cut plexiglass, which can be used for secondary glazing, an advanced form of secondary glazing. We're applying magnetic tape to the plexiglass. And plexiglass is used for aeroplane windows, so it's a bit like Perspex, but it's a very high-quality product with a 30-year guarantee against UV damage. Here we are placing a plexiglass onto another window in the same property and removing the protective film. And then you end up with a sliding sash window, which can open as usual. It's got a sheet of plexiglass on the top sash, a sheet of plexiglass on the bottom sash. It's got concealed brushes in all the beading around the window, and the end result is the same beautiful sash window, 150 years old with all the glass and timber, and yet it's got 70% less heat loss. And it also opens like the door of a Mercedes. And there's a close-up of the bottom of the sash. You can see the secondary glazing in front. You can see the reflection there. That's an example of taking the plexiglass off the magnetic tape. A hinged casement window. A very old iron window, also got plexiglass. This gentleman said that none of his friends notice unless he points it out. And a skylight. And finally, an old window that's been stripped back to bare wood, so it can't even be concealed by the paint. And actually, in front of that lower sash, there's a little line, which is the wooden frame, of a very fine wooden frame on the plexiglass secondary glazing. So even a beautiful stripped wooden sash like that can have an advanced secondary glazing and still look as good as it always did. So that's an example of, just like the many businesses in this room, this is an example how small beginnings can have a ripple effect and gather momentum, and through being the change that we want to see in the world, slowly gathering together with other people, other businesses, one starts to have quite a significant effect. And so far, we've now, after 7 years, insulated nearly 400 homes, and we've saved about 9,000 tons of CO2. So over the past 25 years, Debi has presided over a sea change of public opinion as well, and innovative development, like the many examples in this room today and Mitchell and Dickinson. And we're now well on the way to a low-carbon future. I'd like to share a few statistics that I looked up, which are very positive signs of things to come. Today, 90% of the British public believe that climate change is happening, and 84% believe that it's caused by human activities. The instances of the words low carbon and climate change in the media are now commonplace, whereas 25 years ago they were extremely rare. Renewable electricity on the global market is now cheaper than fossil fuel electricity. 100 oil companies have gone bust in the last 10 years. Denmark gets 100% of its electricity from renewable energy. across England and America, large companies are finding that their sustainable product lines are growing faster than other product lines. The UK's eco-businesses, some examples are Triodos Bank and Ecotricity and Good Energy, emerged almost unscathed from the last recession. So it shows that environmental businesses are incredibly resilient. Greg Clark, the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industry, said that the low-carbon economy will grow 4 times faster than the main economy in the next decade. And I'd like to share something from one of my favourite subjects, which is retrofitting old properties, an astounding fact that I worked out. Britain has 27 million homes, but nearly half of these are pre-war. So that's 12 million homes were built before the Second World War. And there's a new programme called Energisprong, which is partly being championed by Regen Southwest, who are here this evening. And they are aiming to retrofit old properties completely and make them net zero carbon for £30,000 per property. So 12 million homes at £30,000 each represents £360 billion market in retrofitting old properties, which is about £25 billion a year. In terms of job creation, at a salary of £25,000 a year, this could create 1 million new jobs. It will take 1 million new jobs in the UK to retrofit Britain's old homes over the next 15 years. I also believe, and have found through my own lifestyle experiments, that if we adopt low-carbon lifestyles, life in 2050, I believe, when you look around, will look very, very similar to how it looks today. But under the surface, our old homes will be insulated, so much more efficient. The cars may be electric cars, the food may be locally sourced and organic, etc., etc. Life will look much the same as it does today, but I believe if we adopt these low-carbon lifestyles, in real terms, we'll be across the board wealthier, and we'll be healthier, and we'll be happier. So thank you very much for listening.